and welcome to our today's Brownbag-Session. Today, we warmly welcome Nils Unthan. Nils is a PhD candidate and also a university assistant, and Nils is a member of the working group for development studies and sustainability research at the Department of Geography at the University in Innsbruck. And Nils is going to talk today about social innovations in biosphere regions and what is the role of the UNESCO biosphere reserves can take. And Nils, today now we are going to ask you our today's question: how can biosphere reserves promote creative approaches that foster socio-ecological transitions? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I tried to give a quick insight into those findings, and at first I want to share my screen. Yeah, okay. Hopefully it is. Can you see the presentation now? Okay, perfect. Yeah. So how can biosphere reserves promote creative approaches that foster socio-ecological transitions? I want to give a short insight on our findings of our recent research project, CRAFT, Creative Approaches for Socio-Ecological Transitions, where we conducted a comparative study of rural peripheral biosphere reserves as drivers of social innovations. I want to start with a very short theoretical flashlight on a theoretical background. So just to frame it a bit, the developments of our modernity are based on social relations of nature, which are characterized by decoupling and, above all, alienation of society from the fundamental metabolisms of natural processes. And those alienation and decoupling is constantly reproduced by the imperial mode of living, formulated and communicated very well in, for example, the Brandwissen Imperial Way of Life book from 2017. So this leads to unknown but linked problems, and Horst Rittel and Melvin Webber already spoke in the 70s of so-called wicked problems. They are defined as spatial and temporary linked, so they are multidimensional, and we have uncertain knowledge, and we have different interpretations on the emergence and on how to develop solutions. Also uncertain knowledge on path dependencies and on lock-ins. But what we know is that current accepted guidelines, they stabilize current social practices that lead to occurring crises as manifestations of unsustainable systems. And this can only be solved by change. So let's state the business as usual is not an alternative. And the need for profound societal changes is to first adapt to changing conditions, and second, to lay the foundation for good life for all. And therefore, beside technical innovations, these societal challenges and changes will require renewal processes in social, cultural, economic, and political spheres. So in this sense, social innovations are increasingly being discussed as solutions to a variety of challenges where current practices are perceived as inadequate or ineffective. And with that, we can add an experimental component to the debate on sustainable development, as the high complexity of problems also increases uncertainty. So there's no blueprint to follow, and it requires new forms of knowledge production. Just to give us some keywords like transdisciplinarity or post-normal science. A very short empirical background, how did CRAFT emerge? Research in, for, and with biosphere reserves has become a relevant tradition since establishing the first research project funded by the Austrian Academy of Science in 2005 at the Department of Geography under our Prof. Martin Koy. So while REPA and REPA Next from 2005 and 2013 focused on rural biosphere reserve with a perspective of strong boundaries, we found that it is important to take into account the permeability of boundaries through actor networks and actor mobilities. And therefore, analysis investigated the role of experimental initiatives or projects and their network for sustainability transitions in 4 peri-urban biosphere reserves. What it confirmed was that boundaries of biosphere reserves became less relevant for the actors, and that biosphere reserves may rather act as a platform for networks and movements. And we asked in the analysis if and what differences are there in rural areas, for instance, and innovative experience are, and we concluded that deeper knowledge on actors is needed, not on networks, to understand fostering and hindering mechanisms on the emergent appearance of creative approaches. So that's how the CRAFT project then was designed, and it's the Austrian Academy of Science funded project, co-funded by the Swiss Academy for Natural Science, and we did it cross-border and transdisciplinary. So together with the Zürcher Hochschule für angewandte Wissenschaften, the Biosphere Reserve Große Walsertal, and the Biosphere Reserve Engadina Valmischtai in the eastern part of Switzerland. I come to that in a second. The overall question was how do biosphere reserves promote creative approaches that in best case go hand in hand with social innovations. We first wanted to deepen the understanding of creative initiatives for socio-ecological transitions within and in spatial proximity to rural peripheral biosphere reserves. And we wanted to gain a new in-depth understanding of the role and function of biosphere reserves as a regional platform for creative approaches that aim for socio-ecological transitions. And then overall, we wanted to derive enabling mechanisms that foster those approaches. So I want to introduce our design scheme that shows how we did our empirical work, but also further how it is embedded into our understanding of transitions. I first want to explain how we define and we understand those creative approaches. It is a wide and simple definition. So creativity is the driving force for an experimental mindset, and that leads to creative approaches as experimental activities with unknown outcome and the acceptance of risk and uncertainties. The concept of social innovations opens up a perspective on rural areas, which, apart from classical indicators, centers the potential of social movements or social practices in general in rural areas for socio-ecological transformation. And by this interpretation of the concept of social innovation, so we can rural spaces not examine in themselves, but instead by the human practice in relation to rural spaces. Yeah. So social innovations are the implementation of novel action practices, and they aim for new pathways, especially for new forms of organization and lifestyle, to quote SAP. And they are also understood as the production of new meanings, to quote Cope. So the innovative character must be seen in a spatial as well as a temporal dependency. So in a different place and a different time, the social practice is established in people's everyday life, elsewhere, however, not. So often social practices are embedded in hegemonic social relations, and those relations are either reproduced or even then transformed by social innovation. Where did we go? So our case studies and project partner were located in the west part of Austria in Vorarlberg, and the east part of Switzerland in Graubünden in Engadina. It's very sparsely populated. So we have in the Große Walsertal just about 3,500 inhabitants. Bigger agglomerations are Feldkirch or Dornbirn with 30 to 50 kilometers away. And in the Engadina Valmischtai, we have 6,000 inhabitants, but 4.5 of that to the biggest agglomeration in Schwol, which we can see here. And the bigger cities or agglomerations near to it are Chur in Switzerland with 80 kilometers, or Meran in Italy with 100, and Landeck in Austria with 70 kilometers. So very rural, very peripheral. I want now to come to some findings on our in-depth analysis of creative actors and creative approaches. So what we can say, we have highly normative actors. So concrete steps to cope for global challenges do not necessarily be related to formulate overall aims. It's more a normative overall frame and stage there. They are rooted, so regional effectiveness leads to regional contributions. And what is very important is the context. So context matters. Activities focus on local disparities, and those local disparities are because of personal identification with the region or the space. Yeah? And this quote underlines this quite well, creating a concept simply to live further on. Here, of course, for sure, it had to be something ecological. That wasn't a question, that is our ideology, as one of the interviews said. Through their everyday practices and actions, sometimes through precisely set impulses, their project and unfold impact in relation to local challenges. We need to narrow the perspective from the grand narrative of a socio-ecological transformation to small-scale impulses that impact on local and regional level. That is why we talked about socio-ecological transitions and not transformations. In consequence, social practices unfold their effect implicit by an alignment of practice-oriented production of the local rural space, which is linked to wider debate on societal challenges by understanding creative approaches and social innovations. Also here, a very interesting quote that underlines it very well. Let's do something. We can come up with a concept together, try something new. Above all, let's try not to do something with tourism. That tourism is always a bit dangerous for the region. So you can see the normative frame of the actors there. So how can biosphere reserves promote creative approaches? They can take biographical aspects into consideration. Creative approaches and the resulting innovations are strongly dependent on biographical aspects of the actors involved. Despite the highly subjective nature of these factors, recurring commonalities can be found that they were mentioned by the majority of all the actors studied. So far, these actor-related factors have not been taken into account enough in the discussion of social innovations. Here, biosphere reserves can take a strong position and bundle creativity by acting as contact points. As a model region for sustainable development and the core instrument of UNESCO's Man of the Biosphere program, ideas can be developed and tested how biosphere reserves can guarantee even more open mental space for those actors in the future, through which creative actors can act as social, cultural, and ecological beacons from which an entire region can benefit. They can foster and promote progressive identities. So the previous slide has shown that biographical factors have a decisive influence on the emergence of creative approaches. Creative actors often proceed according to trial and error and learning by doing principles. So their tested approaches often emerge in dialogue within a network of shared values and norms. This cognitive proximity creates trust and can encourage actors in designing experimental projects. And sharing with the same values of socio-ecological aspects, biosphere reserves can create protected niches whose creative atmosphere favors the emergence of social innovations. By proactively seeking initiatives, biosphere reserves can influence the promotion of a political progressive and shared identity and further strengthen or renew intact community structures. So they can enable translocal dynamics. The specific attributions of rural areas influence the actors' engagement with the region. For example, the low density of buildings in the regions under study is perceived as inspiring, and the regions are thus perceived as creative retreats. The cultural landscape is charged with a narrative of a natural landscape which is worth preserving. So the normative attitude of the actors unfolds its socio-ecological effect when creative approaches are embedded in an environment in which experimental ideas can emerge on the basis of shared views and values. Trust and openness to new ideas and meanings are crucial for this. And also important was that urban and rural connections have been proven to be an important stimulus for creativity and experimental behavior. And therefore, biosphere reserve and their embeddedness into a global network can particularly proactive in triggering dynamic innovation processes by enable inspiration through the exchange and supporting those translocalities. they can leave the niche. So the analysis of the creative approaches have shown that many actors fear rapid consolidation and are critical of fast institutionalization processes. Embedding too quickly in established structures can stifle creative approaches and hinders experiments to develop as innovations. Biosphere areas or reserves must act as a multi-scala platform and continue to be aware of their responsibility to act as regional key actors for socio-ecological transformation processes. And with their platform function, biosphere reserves can prevent new social practices from being quickly torn out of their meaning context. Let's sum it up and come to an end. To conclude, rural peripheral biosphere reserves can play an effective role in promoting socio-ecological transitions. The 4 compass directions we developed enables an actor-oriented discussion of the often very abstract question of how to promote social innovations and socio-ecological transformation processes. So the compass also supports the dialogue of biosphere reserves with creative actors, initiatives, or movements. But the concrete design of measures and actions is in the responsibility of the respective biosphere areas itself as key experts and key actors of the regions. As regional key actors, they can better take into account regional specificities and thus adapt actions to current challenges in a more targeted manner. I want to finish with this final slide of 2 interview quotations that can stand for themselves and can be left uncommented, but pretty good underline the presented results. So thank you for your attention and sorry for the time delay. So, thank you.
Will ensure nature conservation in the 21st century. Be part of the new 4-semester part-time master program. Carinthia University of Applied Sciences.